A veteran trucker can call a turbocharger's death 3 weeks before it happens, with zero warning lights and nothing wrong on the gauge cluster. Somewhere inside that engine, a piece of machinery is spinning fast enough to defy normal intuition, quietly wearing itself apart in a way the dashboard was never built to notice, and almost nobody outside the industry knows that gap even exists. If you assumed a truck's electronics would catch a serious problem before it turned dangerous, wait until you hear how far behind those sensors actually are, and how much money and risk sit inside that blind spot. If you're the kind of person who wants to actually understand what's happening under the hood before it costs you thousands, subscribe, because this channel is built on exactly that kind of detail. And drop a comment. Has your gut ever caught a problem on your own vehicle before any warning light did? What is it about the way a turbo fails that lets it hide from every sensor watching it? And why, with all the technology in a modern truck, is a mentor's mumbled hunch still more reliable than the dash? To understand why an experienced ear beats a digital readout, you first have to understand what a turbocharger is actually doing under the hood, because it is one of the most punishing components on the entire truck. A turbocharger uses the engine's own exhaust gas to spin a turbine wheel, which is connected by a shared shaft to a compressor wheel on the intake side. As the exhaust spins the turbine, the compressor forces extra air into the cylinders, letting the engine burn more fuel and produce more power without simply making the engine bigger. It sounds simple in concept. In execution, it is one of the most violent environments on the entire vehicle. That shaft is spinning at extraordinary speed, and depending on the unit, it can be turning well over 100,000 revolutions per minute, with some smaller high-boost units spinning even faster than that. All of that speed is supported by a razor-thin film of oil, sometimes only a few thousandths of an inch thick, and that oil film is the only thing standing between smooth operation and metal touching metal. That single detail is the whole story. When a turbo starts to die, it is almost never a sudden event. It is a slow degradation of that oil film and the bearings riding on it, caused by oil starvation, contamination, carbon buildup, or simple wear after hundreds of thousands of miles. And here's the part that catches new drivers completely off guard. The gauges on the dashboard, the boost pressure reading, the exhaust gas temperature display, none of them are measuring the bearing directly. They are measuring downstream effects, air pressure in the intake manifold, temperature in the exhaust stream. A turbo can be wearing out internally for a long time while those readings stay stubbornly close to normal, because the compressor and turbine wheels can still spin and still produce boost, even while the bearing supporting them is slowly grinding itself apart. The failure, when it finally shows up on a gauge, tends to arrive fast and ugly rather than gradually. This is exactly why the sound comes first. A turbo bearing that is starting to wear develops a very specific kind of noise, a rising whine that changes character, sometimes described as a siren note that gets sharper under load and fades differently than it used to on deceleration. Veteran drivers do not need a manual to identify it. They have heard a healthy turbo spool up and wind down thousands of times, and the moment the pitch or the timing of that whine shifts even slightly, it registers immediately, almost the way a parent picks out their own child's voice in a crowded room. Alongside the sound, there is smoke to watch for. Blue-gray smoke from the exhaust, especially under acceleration or right after idling, usually means oil is slipping past worn seals and being burned in the combustion chamber, which is one of the clearest physical signs that the bearing clearances have opened up. Increased oil consumption between changes is the quieter cousin of that same symptom, and an experienced driver checking the dipstick more often than the manual suggests is rarely being paranoid. There is also a feel to it, not just a sound. A wearing turbo often shows up as boost lag that gets slightly worse over time. A truck that used to pull hard right off idle now hesitates for a beat longer before the power arrives. Some drivers describe a faint rattle at idle after shutdown, caused by looseness in the wastegate linkage or shaft play that has developed as bearing clearances widen. None of that trips a warning light, because none of it crosses the threshold that the engine control module is programmed to flag. The computer is watching for boost pressure outside an acceptable range, or exhaust temperatures climbing into dangerous territory. It is not listening for a whine that is changed by a few hertz, and it is not smelling hot oil drifting back through the cab vents on a humid morning. Those are human senses doing a job no sensor on the truck is built to do. This gap between mechanical symptoms and electronic detection is not new, and it did not appear by accident. Turbocharging became essential to heavy trucking through the final decades of the last century, first as a way to squeeze more power and better fuel economy out of engines without simply making them bigger and heavier, and then as emissions regulations tightened and engine builders needed more precisely controlled airflow to hit combustion targets. Wastegates were added to control boost pressure mechanically, and later, variable geometry turbochargers arrived, adjusting the angle of internal vanes to optimize airflow across a wider range of engine speeds. Each generation added capability, and each generation also added new points where a small mechanical issue could hide behind a dashboard that still looked perfectly normal. Boost sensors and exhaust temperature sensors were added over the years to help catch problems electronically, but they were designed to catch pressure and temperature anomalies, not bearing wear itself. And that distinction is exactly why the old-fashioned skill of listening never went away. There is a real financial argument behind why drivers train themselves to catch this early, and it is not a small one. A full turbocharger replacement on a heavy-duty diesel, including labor, can run into the thousands of dollars. And depending on the unit and the shop, some jobs land well north of that, once related components like the wastegate actuator or intake piping are inspected and replaced alongside it. Catch a turbo in the early whining stage, and a driver might get it addressed on a scheduled shop visit with minimal downtime. Miss it, and there is a real risk of a catastrophic failure at speed, where the turbine or compressor wheel disintegrates, sending metal fragments through the intake or exhaust system, and potentially causing damage far beyond the turbo itself. For an owner-operator paying every repair bill directly out of pocket and losing income for every hour the truck sits in a bay instead of on the road, the difference between catching it early and catching it late is not a minor inconvenience. It is real money and real risk stacked on top of each other. This kind of diagnostic instinct did not come from a training manual. It came from time, from thousands of hours behind the wheel of the same truck, or trucks so similar that the baseline sound becomes second nature. Older drivers often talk about learning this the hard way, riding along early in their careers with a mentor who would casually mention a sound neither of them could have described precisely, only to be proven right weeks later when the part failed exactly as predicted. That kind of knowledge transfer, one driver teaching another to notice a change in pitch or a faint smell of hot oil, is part of a broader culture in trucking where mechanical sympathy is treated as a genuine professional skill, not a party trick. It is the same instinct that lets an experienced driver feel a wheel bearing starting to go through the steering wheel, or sense a fuel injector misfiring before the check engine light ever comes on. The industry is not standing still on this problem, and it would be dishonest to pretend the gap between mechanical symptoms and electronic detection will stay exactly as wide as it is today. Fleet telematics systems are increasingly layering in vibration analysis and acoustic monitoring alongside the traditional pressure and temperature sensors, aiming to catch exactly the kind of early bearing wear that a veteran ear has always picked up first. Predictive maintenance platforms now flag subtle trends in sensor data over time, rather than waiting for a hard threshold to be crossed, which is a meaningful step toward closing that gap. But these systems are still catching up to something human drivers have been doing instinctively for decades, and in plenty of trucks running older engines without that level of instrumentation, the ear is still the earliest warning system there is. The electric trucks entering the market changed this conversation entirely, since a battery electric drivetrain has no turbocharger to fail in the first place. But that transition is going to take a long time to reach the bulk of the long-haul diesel fleet, which means this particular skill is going to remain relevant for a good while yet. So when you see an experienced driver pause mid-conversation, tilt their head, and mutter something about a turbo before any warning light has appeared, you are not watching a party trick or a lucky guess. You are watching the product of thousands of hours spent listening to the same mechanical voice, learning its healthy pitch so thoroughly that even the smallest change stands out immediately, long before a sensor built to measure pressure and temperature ever catches up. The gauge will tell you eventually, the ear tells you first. And in an industry where downtime costs real money and a catastrophic failure at highway speed carries real risk, that gap between hearing it and seeing it on a screen is exactly why the old instincts have never gone out of style. Have you ever caught a mechanical problem on your own truck before the dashboard ever said a word about it? Drop your story below, because these are exactly the details that never make it into a manual.